There's a new book out. It's called Stories by Jesus. And I saw that it's in our library. It's on display. And the author takes a look at several of the most familiar passages that the Christian church has had a fairly standard understanding of. And this author tries to see them through the eyes of the Jewish people who would have been hearing the stories, right? Because there weren't any Christians. So from the Jewish mindset and ears, what would they have heard? It's very different than what we may have come to think about these passages. So in the Luke passage, so he told them this parable. Which one of you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one that is lost? Do you remember that Jesus talked to a lot of poor people? A lot of the people who were disenchanted, who'd been left out? So when they heard that first line, which one of you, having 100 sheep? Well, they would say, not me. I don't have 100 sheep. 100 sheep is what a rich person has. I have 3 or 4. So they all would have said, no, you're talking to the wrong crowd. But as we know, a lot of times, these teachings and these sayings were directed both to the poor people, but also to the wealthier people, the scribes and the Pharisees, the keepers of the law, who were hearing about them. So this parable, so it's suggested in the stories of Jesus, is really one that is designed to be heard by people who have quite a bit. So this is another one of the parables of the wealthy and the poor. So which one of you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, have you ever had anything to do with sheep? Have you ever had anything to do with cattle? Can you imagine a flock of 100 sheep milling around, constantly on the move, and you're there 29, 30, 31, 32. No, don't move, don't move. Okay, I better start again. Right? How do you count and get an accurate count to 99? So that you're able to say, there's one missing. It's very complicated, and the people who were listening, who had been shepherds, who had their small little flocks, would have seen wealthy sheep herders who would not have noticed that there was one had gone astray, because in fact it's almost impossible to keep count of a large herd. This is kind of interesting, isn't it? So then, which one of you does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one that's lost? Well, the people listening would have said, what fool is it that leaves the huge bulk of your herd or flock to go scampering off after one. Unless you had helpers, which is also something that rich people had, you would never have left your sheep, this huge flock, 99, vulnerable in the wilderness and untended. And then off they go to find the one that is lost, and searches until it's lost. And when he finds it, he lays it on his shoulders and rejoices. Now, have you ever tried to pick up a sheep? Have you ever tried to carry it over your shoulder? Even if it was a small sheep, it will not sit there very placidly like my Pemberley does. They squirm, they fight to get away. It would be a job. It's no wonder then that when he gets it back, he's so relieved. He has this overstated reaction of calling all his friends and neighbors and say, hey, guess what I've done? I've carried a wiggly wobbly sheep over my shoulder, and I brought it back to the flock, which, thank goodness, had not been eaten by the wolves. So, the author of Stories of Jesus says from a Jewish point of view, this story does not lead them to the kind of message that the Christian church has got from it. There came a time in Christian history when we moved from kind of spiritual discernment to moral discernment, where we made the lost sheep into someone or something that depicted a character of a person who had gone astray, who had set out on their own. And it would take Jesus to find that person. And most of the good folks would just wait for Jesus to call that person back. This author says it's not that moral teaching at all, because sheep just don't know. Like, you would never pick a sheep if you were going to talk about moral character. So he says, the fact that we have focused on and named the parable the lost sheep says right away to a Jewish audience hearing this that we have missed the point. For the point of the parable, the story, from his Jewish ears, is the shepherd who lost a sheep. It is the shepherd who has lost something. And for each of the parables that we're going to look at this month, he retitles them. This shepherd who lost something had to do a few things before he found out that it was lost. First, he had to count what he had. And because this parable is being written so that people of wealth can hear, people who have amassed their own fortune, they are the people who in this parable, it is saying, you have lost something as you've accumulated all this wealth. First, you're going to have to see what you have and be really starkly honest about what you have. And then you're going to look at what you don't have. When I served in a little church in Saskatchewan, I arrived there as the minister shortly after there'd been a family breakup, a marriage breakup, between two people then in their 30s who had grown up and gone to school together, and they had both been part of this small community. They were both brilliant, and they both excelled at school. And as the story goes, they quite loved each other. He wanted to farm. She wanted to go and work in the world. So I arrived there shortly after she had gone, about 4 or 5 years. She was already working with the United Nations in refugee work and in trying to find ways that refugee camps could be better, how people were being treated. It was a sad story. They'd had so much. And then, in order to kind of be who they wanted and needed to be, they had lost so much. This story, this lost and found, according to this new Jewish interpretation, is about people who have much also recognizing that in the amount they have, they can also inadvertently lose something. I didn't hear anything more after I left that church. I didn't hear anything more about this couple, aside from just local things. Fast forward about 12 years, and a friend was sent to, got a job, a 6-month internship in Nairobi to sit at the woman's desk of one of our partner churches there. And a person who I had kind of kept in touch with from this small town, Saskatchewan town, said, I'm going to go and visit this person who's doing this 6-month internship. And while I'm there, I'm also going to see Liz, the woman who had left her marriage left so much in order to work with the United Nations, because she was also there in Nairobi. So this common friend went and visited the person on the internship and visited Liz, who was now quite high up in the United Nations. And when she came back, this friend said, "You wouldn't have believed it. The person on the internship could come and go and could see Nairobi, and nobody cared where she went or what she did, because her work was insignificant, was seen so much on the edge. But when I went to visit Liz, I found that she was behind high gates with heavy security, and she did not have the freedom to go freely about her life. She was now a high-ranking United Nations official. What she had gained was tremendous. And the small town was very proud of her. But what she had lost in living her life whenever she went overseas to be with the people that she sought to help, what she had lost was the freedom even to talk to them, unless it was scheduled and secure. Do you get this different take on lost and found? It is a deeply spiritual condition to take stock of what we have. But then, as we honestly take stock of what we have, to equally know that there will be losses by the choices we've made, by the compromises and everything. And that if we want that which is lost in our lives, we will have to chase it and find it. The Jewish author of Stories by Jesus, it was a common understanding in the Jewish faith of the time, and certainly of now, that often when people become wealthy, they lose the capacity to see what the ordinary people need. It's not that they become bad people. It's just that they lose that connection. And so as Jesus might be talking to this crowd of poor people, this parable might be about the rich person in their midst who has lost the capacity to see them, to be part of them. And that until that person realizes that they've lost something, they won't go after it. Well, I don't know what you think about that. It was, for me, a unique way to see it. We'll look at lost and found stories and parables throughout this month. And maybe maybe there's something new for us to see. Thank you for listening. Amen.